correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello, Combination, and welcome to the Dice Ball Podcast, covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the Genesys Role Playing Game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host, GM Hooley, and this episode we've got an amazingly awesome episode, but we'll talk about that later. But for the moment, let me introduce you to the people who won't let me do quirky introductions anymore because they claim that they're quirky enough. My hosts and friends, GM Huz, GM Flano and GM Caitlin. How are we all this afternoon?
Pretty good, I'd say.
I love how we introduce ourselves as like too quirky and how are we? Pretty good.
Well, that's where the quirkiness comes from.
That's right.
Yeah, no one's expecting
we're not
that.
allowed to do quirky introductions anymore.
No, see, it's complete unpredictability.
Yeah,
It's very good.
I missed that.
So, guys, what's everybody been up to this last week? Michael?
This last week, well, what have I been up to? Well, again, more stars of outnumber. That seems to be the go-to every time. Been playing lots of Infinity. Again,
Yes.
that's life now. Working. Lots of work. That's another thing. Podcasting.
Yes.
Another thing.
Potting.
Potting.
Potting. That's a
It's a
good
new
word.
Yep.
That's Ian's job.
Right.
He does the potting.
Potting.
Oh, no, you know what I did get in the mail this week?
What did you get in the mail
I
this
got
week?
my adventure location cards.
Oh,
Now,
they
these-
look amazing.
These things are tip-top. I backed them on Kickstarter about 18 or so months ago. And essentially what they are is, I've got 3 decks of them, one for fantasy, one for modern, and one for sci-fi. And all they are, there's about, I don't know, 60 or so cards in the deck. There's a fair few
whole
of them.
heap of them.
Yeah, they're double-sided. One side just has like a really rough mud map of like a location. And the other side has the same mud map, just a little bit smaller, plus a heap of like detailed information for the GM to use. Like I'll crack one open here and read it out. And it's all very, very generic. So you can, there's literally no game system you couldn't use these in.
Yeah.
That's what makes them so amazing. Like,
Genesys is perfect for it.
yeah, dude. Honestly, if you're a GM and you're taking your players to locations, because I hear that happens in role-playing games, these are
Only sometimes.
Yeah, these
Yes.
are invaluable. Like, if your PCs end up in a random location, these are great. Like they have both areas on the back of the card for the GM to use, where it has the mud map with listings of what's what. Like I'm looking at here, I've got a warehouse card, and it's got it's loading docks, raised platforms for cargo shuttles. It's short and sweet, just like that. But immediately that paints a picture for you as a GM and all your players, and you can populate that as much stuff as you like. But then the coolest part is the little plot hooks, which you don't have to use, but you could use them if you're stuck. Like it just has 3 or 4 just ideas you can use. Like I'm looking here, it says number 3, an employee is using this warehouse as the central distribution location for a local chemical dealer. Well, it kind of sounds like a bit of Walter White action going on there for Breaking Bad. But like that gives you a little cool plot hook. Like if you were stuck for plot hooks, you could grab one of these cards and just go, okay, what are my players going to do this week for an adventure idea? And immediately you get an idea and a reason to go to that location. And they're so good. They're amazing.
Yep.
Best investment of like $40.
Or if you're not sure where to go next because the players have thrown you for a loop, shuffle the deck up.
Roundly
And
shuffle and there you go. Yeah.
I'm not too sure if they're available for retail sale yet because they literally have only just arrived from the Kickstarter.
Won't be too long.
Yeah, they're from a company a little independent company called Rogue Comet, and the quality is amazing. They're really nice, glossy cards.
Yeah, they look good.
They've done a really good job, and I was following them on Kickstarter the whole way through, and they were really in touch with the backers, and they never left the backers, asking where's our Kickstarter. It was constant updates. And if you want to save yourself some money as well, they also do them as PDFs, so you can print them out yourself.
That's cool.
But
and then trying to print on demand or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
They could do that.
I think I paid like $40 or $60 for these on Kickstarter, and worth every cent. To be honest, so if you're GM, look out for those and get them because they are so good.
They are cool. Martin, what have you been up to?
Pretty much the usual, Pathfinder, World of Darkness, plenty of Infinity. I don't know, this is going to sound really geeky as well, but I've gotten back into a online forum-based RPG.
A forum-based RPG?
Yeah. It's
like a play-by-mail type thing?
Play by post.
Yeah.
So so it's something that I was into when I was younger, but me and a couple of old friends, have decided to get back into it because it's a way for us to interact, even though we don't get together very often.
Mm-hmm.
And we pretend to be ninjas. So
that's cool.
It's a lot of fun. The website's called Nimpocho, so Ninja Scroll.
Yep.
And yeah, it's super geeky, but yeah.
That sounds cool. Caitlin.
Well, here's the thing. My work is taking up far too much of my gaming time.
This is just uncalled for.
I'm fully aware, and I've expressed my concern to my employer, but they were not as concerned about my time as I was. No. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to game as much as I'd like to, but I have played Dragon Squadron, which we spoke about in a previous episode, and also the Stars Without Number campaign. We had another session of that last night, which was super fun. We had less meetings, but
There's still meetings though.
There was.
Yeah. They were more abroad this time though.
There was, yeah. And but it was we got to do a little bit more of like an activity and work together to try and solve a problem kind of thing, which was good. It was a really good session. It was a lot of fun. And other than that, just general hanging out with you guys.
Oh. Well, I've unfortunately had to drop out of Stars Without Number. That's because of parenting duties, but that's okay. I'm about to start on a Thursday night gig every fortnight at Genesys Games in Brisbane. I'm going to see if I can get some more people into Genesys and just run a few games there to show people how to play. So if you are listening and you are in Brisbane and you are keen to learn about how to play the game, pop down to Genesys Games, which it's a little cafe. They make really nice food. I can highly recommend it.
Yep.
And I'll be running a few games there. So, it'll be quite cool. But as far as any other stuff that I've been up to, planning, because after what happened at Dragon Squadron, a few ideas formulating, writing a few notes and, taking advantage of the first step of session 0 to sit down and work out exactly what I want to do for Star Wars. So, obviously once I've got that formulated in my mind and on paper, I can then bring that to the players and then we can work out what we're going to do from there. So, that's probably about as much gaming as I've been up to.
Well, speaking of new gigs, you know what I start next week?
What do you start next week?
Well, I start Infinity RPG from Genesys Games.
Ooh.
So I was stepping away from narrative dice from Genesys for a little bit. We're doing a 0 session. So we're all very excited for that. All my Infinity gaming buddies. So
except for me.
Yeah, hashtag no invite. I thought we did everything together.
Sorry,
all right, I understand.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just gonna go cry now.
Well, we're supposed to start
you
that.
And me both.
We're supposed to have a session 0 the other day, but unfortunately the GM came down with a stomach bug, so we've postponed that a week. But we're using the.
Where's his commitment?
Oh,
Yeah,
right. Well, apparently in his words, he was concerned about driving home. So.
Oh dear.
Yeah, that's a little stomach bug.
Leaving skid marks that I don't mean on the car. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh dear. But
that's what he would have said.
The fantastic thing about the Infinity RPG, it uses a really cool character generating system where you don't go through and necessarily build your character by buying bits and pieces with the points buy. It's you partially randomly generate your character from start to finish, going through all these careers. And it's sort of like a little mini RPG session when you make your own character.
Yeah.
Because you start with your life of where you're born, what social class you're born, and so you work your way through different careers. And it's possible for random roles.
Yeah.
You can get fired during your character creation
and
end up as unemployed. And then that opens up a whole heap of different career choices and branch skill opportunities for your character.
Yeah.
So at the end of the creation, you have a few points up your sleeve to change things or re-roll things on the tables however you like. But generally speaking, your character is probably about 50% random in how it turns out. So you really
Love to give it a try.
Yeah, it's quite unique. And in Modifius have a really cool interactive browser app for it. So the book does have pages and pages and pages of tables for it. However, the app handles it all. You just click next, select your option, click next, select your option, go for it. At the end, it generates a PDF character sheet for you. And you're good to go. It's fantastic.
That's cool.
So we were really keen to get stuck into that because it is so different to any other role-playing game we've played before. And it does use Modificus's 2D20 system.
Because Star Trek uses
Star
that,
Trek uses
and
it too.
Conan and something else as well.
It's their jam, I think.
Because that character creation system seems very similar, well, in concept anyway, to Traveller in the way, but obviously you don't die during character generation, which is possible in Traveller.
Well, that's true. Well, yeah. No, you can die in Infinity.
Really?
Yeah, but you come back in a new body. And it could be worse or better than the body you started with.
Okay.
Because it's like Infinity.
Because you get cubes.
Cubes, which are your stacks, if you're familiar with other cyberpunk settings and fiction. So you can die during character creation. You can become unemployed and die, which I was mucking around with some characters. And one of my characters, he got fired, then he died, he came back in a siren host, and all these other crazy things happened to him before I even hit the table.
Wow.
So yeah, it's interesting. He just derives a complete character for you at the end, which incorporates all his past history events, and you have to fill the blanks.
Yeah, that's cool.
Gives your GM heaps of cool little plot hooks.
There's no reason why you can't do this sort of thing in Genesys.
No, not at all. Because it generates numbers for you, but it does generate also a lot of fluff, background fluff, which you could just ignore the numbery side of things, but you could just absolutely use this system and create a very fluffy background for your character by just random results.
That's cool.
Same with the L5R and the 20 questions in the beta that is available.
Exactly. And the other thing that I'm probably, at this point, when people are hearing this, I'm probably about a week away from traveling to the far reaches of the United States and Plano, Texas, where I'll be going to Game & Action Con.
Yeah.
I unfortunately will be the only one in the crew that is representing, but I will be representing.
Way to rub that one in.
Sorry, guys. Yeah. So
I'll be. We were friends.
Yeah, I thought we did everything together.
Apparently not. But no, I'll be doing running some games. I'll be helping with the event registration and whatever else at the show. So I'll be very, very busy and catching up with listeners. Answering some questions, and I'm actually going to do, no, I haven't actually spoken to you guys about this, but I'm going to do a setting roulette with some of the players.
Oh, sounds like a good idea.
To sort of see how that a random group of people together can actually form a setting, because I think that it's a solid idea that we've put into practice, and we've been quite popular with regards to Night's Edge on Facebook. So yeah. But anyway, we've got a very important thing to be doing right now.
We should.
And I think that, I think it's time for Sam of the show.
Don't wait. It's core of the show, isn't it?
Oh, that's right. Core of the show. And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we will take a deep dive into a topic concerning the Genesys role-playing game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, many of you, if you're anything like us, have a heap of questions about the Genesys role-playing game. So, as a special treat and something that we all are really excited about, instead of us going through all of your questions that you've sent us through, and that's lots of questions, like over 150 I think it was, we thought we might go literally to the man who wrote the book. We are honoured to introduce you to a person who needs no introduction, which makes me ask why I'm asking this bit anyway. The Dice Ball Podcast is proud to have on our show Sam Stewart, RPG manager and lead developer of the Genesys role-playing game. Sam, welcome to the show. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for having me. This is this is quite an honor on my end, so thank you.
Awesome. Yes, it's you're our first guest, so well done you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's all good.
Well, gee.
We'll get this question out of the way because it saves us having to ask it 50 million times. And I know that you get asked this question every single time you get interviewed. So what can you comment on any future projects about from Fantasy Flight Games?
Well, unfortunately, it is company policy that I cannot comment on anything that hasn't been announced on our website yet. So if it hasn't been announced, then I can't say anything about it, which is pretty much all future projects.
We could dream.
We had a lot of questions that are future project based. So
yeah. Cool.
Oh, that's totally understandable.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to some of the more serious questions. So, Sam, tell us the Sam Stewart story. Where are you from? What do you actually do?
So I'm the manager of the role-playing department at Fantasy Flight Games. I've been working at FFG for, May is going to be my 10th year anniversary. Started out as a lowly editor and have worked my way up to a lowly department manager, I suppose.
Yeah.
For most of that time, I've been working on role-playing games. I've worked on the Warhammer 40K role-playing games back when we had the license with Games Workshop.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked on Star Wars and now Genesys, and my department's also working on Legend of the Five Rings.
Cool.
So that's basically been my career in the industry side of gaming. Otherwise, I spend a lot of time, obviously, playing role-playing games outside of work.
Nice.
Living the dream.
Yes. And I'm also an avid miniatures gamer. So I do a lot of painting and hobbying with minis.
There you go. I think you've just become GM Huzz's best friend.
Yeah, I'm addicted to that. Do plenty of that myself. Yeah.
Right on.
Cool.
We'll have to share what games we paint for.
Absolutely.
Well, Legion, obviously, with that coming out very shortly.
Yeah, Legion.
Some of the demo models that were at Gen Con last year were actually painted by myself.
Wow.
Nice.
Awesome. I think I've watched the videos of all those in it, so I've seen the paint job a million times, which is cool. Very nice.
Yeah, I don't think any of the ones that were videoed were mine. Just the ones played on the demo tables. They're better painters than me who get pictures taken of their models.
All right, so some more questions. Mike.
All right, well, I guess we're all RPG players here, so I guess we all have our own origin story in RPGs. What got you into RPGs in the first place?
Well, I have to admit, it was actually the old BioWare game, Neverwinter Nights. I actually played that before I started playing tabletop role-playing games.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'd known about D&D before that and had read some of the books, but never actually played in a game. And then went off to college, started playing a lot of video games, met some of my friends who would become friends I've role-played with for years now, and had that moment of like, oh, yeah, this Neverwinter game. Oh, there's a tabletop version of that. Right. Okay, how does that work?
That's great.
Pissed off a lot of my friends when I would say, like, yeah, but doesn't that talent work this way? It doesn't in the video game.
Very cool.
But that's how it got started.
Cool. Excellent.
A strong start. So the next question is, if you could play or GM in any setting in the Genesys RPG, what would it be?
Any setting that was in the core book, or any setting at all?
I think any setting at all.
So anything that you've designed yourself or thought about designing or whatever else. So if you had any scope whatsoever, and this is obviously the disclaimer that this is not what FFG are working on, but yeah, if there was any setting that you could do yourself, what would it be? And that can include any sort of setting that's in the book as well.
Oh, sure. Well, the one I'm running right now for my friends, that's in my in my actual free time, we could never publish anyway because it's a combination of Ghost in the Shell and some other futuristic stuff, using a whole bunch of different miniatures for player figures made by the company Corvus Belli, the company that does Infinity. Yep. So sort of this Japanese manga mecha hybrid game.
Yeah, I'm a big Infinity player myself. So.
Same here.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Nice. I do have some Nomad models and some Ariadne models.
Nice.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, so poor old cool. Caitlin and I left out a little bit there, but that's okay.
Hey, I can appreciate a fine model any day of the week, absolutely. And that sounds amazing what you've just described to me.
Yeah.
So I guess that would be the setting.
Fantastic. So one of the other things that we love when we all get around the table is that we tend to, particularly when we're hanging out socially, is that we don't really talk about what we got to, what we've been up to lately. We talk about what our characters have been up to and what our favorite gaming moments are. So my question to you, Sam, is what is your favorite RPG moment?
Okay. So, recently or overall?
Whenever.
Let's go overall. What is your favorite of all time?
No pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Let's see. I think one of my favorite role-playing moments was in the Star Wars role-playing game, and I was actually playing a character and not GMing. And it was a situation where my character was doing a lot of stuff that wasn't combat related. We were being chased by the Empire, as so often happens,
as you do.
But it was one of those situations where we were doing a lot of stuff out of combat that was generating a lot of strain for my character, and my character exceeded his strain threshold. And the GM and I talked about it and decided that instead of just leaving the scene or passing out or whatever, what I wanted to do was take the spaceship that we had just salvaged and were going to hopefully sell for a ton of money or use for ourselves, program an autopilot, and cause it to ram into the Star Destroyer, which, I mean, was going to be basically like a bug hitting the windshield of a car moving at 60 miles an hour. I mean, Star Destroyer is going to be fine. It was just the ultimate act of spite that hurt our own group. And afterwards, we were talking about it, and that's sort of where some of the ideas for what to do when you exceed your strength threshold in social situations ended up coming from a few years later.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Very cool.
All right, so what inspired you the most with regards to designing Genesys in the first place?
Well, let's see. There were a few things that went into it. Honestly, one thing, and I have to give a shout out to GM Phil Mayowski. I don't think I ever pronounced his name right, and he's going to be listening to this too.
He'll take up with you, no doubt, at Game Nation Con for that. So yeah,
we'll be looking out for the comment on this video.
I'll probably get an email in my inbox tomorrow. He'll just know. No, but Phil, it was at Game Nation Con a few years back, actually, and Phil was running he'd taken the Star Wars rules and was running a Fallout game set in the Fallout universe, but with the adapted Star Wars rules for it. And I mean, you for any of you who have met or had the chance to play in a game Phil runs, he's an excellent GM, obviously.
Yes.
And after that, I was talking with Chris Witt at the end of the convention, and Chris made a comment about how it was, as he was getting on in his gaming career, he was looking more and more for just one game that he could do a lot of stuff with. He wasn't as interested in learning new games all the time.
Yep.
And so we got talking about generic systems, and well, a few months later, I pitched the idea of making a generic narrative dice system game to Fantasy Flight, and they were willing to accept.
Nice.
They were willing to try it out. So that was kind of the inspiration behind it.
Cool.
I think we can say we're all very grateful for that conversation to take place.
The narrative dice were the perfect set of tools sitting there, waiting for this to happen, and it's really worked out, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
Well, all credit to Jay Little for coming up with the idea in the first place, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mike.
So next question comes from Swordbreaker, and this is a bit of a combination, wasn't it?
Combination, yeah.
So this question coming up is a bit of a combo of two very similar questions from Swordbreaker and Geiger Streak. which is, when designing the game, were there any lessons that you learned specifically from Star Wars that allowed you a do-over? For example, talent pyramid versus career specs, force powers versus Genesys magic, and etc. Or was it more the natural adaptation of setting specific versus generic?
Yeah, well, some of it was certainly just creating a generic system, like the requirements that go into creating it and what we needed to do to make that work. And the talent trees or specialization trees versus the talent pyramid is a great example of that. I am a big fan of specialization trees. I mean, but I actually think they serve a very valuable purpose, and I think a lot of people have noticed that they do a lot to help define a character and the specialization within that character. They make characters feel very unique because they have this unique set of advancements to move through. Yep. So I think you can absolutely do a lot of interesting stuff with them, and I think they're super useful. But one of the things about them, and one of their successes, is they're also they very quickly become very closely defined with a specific setting and a specific character type. And when we were making Genesys, we realized that we were going to be dealing with a lot of character types and across a lot of different settings. And so we just didn't see a way that we could do specialization trees without making them incredibly generic, which we felt kind of defeated the purpose, or making them super specific, in which case it would have been more like a 500-page book.
Yeah.
Because it would have chewed up a lot of page space more than anything else with all of those, so many different types of specializations, yeah?
Oh, yeah. And it honestly would have been really hard to test and balance them all. I mean, just testing 18 or 19 at a time is rough.
I guess doing it this way as well, from like a future testing perspective, you don't have to worry about testing a new spec tree every time a book comes out. It's sort of a lot more free, I guess you could say.
We can focus on the narrative.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
cool.
There are definitely some benefits to that as well. And Magic was another interesting case of where we were what we were learning from what we'd previously done with the narrative dice system. We knew that we weren't going to have any force dice or any equivalent sort of die to work with. We wanted to simplify things slightly, and also the force die is very specific to how the force works. And I wouldn't. I don't think it would just be a easy port over, or really that good a port over. It's something that's very unique to Star Wars role playing.
Yeah.
So since we were going to do something new anyway, it also gave us a chance to to basically weave our new magic rules more closely into the core mechanics, basically skill checks, so that no matter how there are always some differences between how skill checks work in particular situations, and magic and combat there can be differences to it, but overall the core concept is still the same now, which is something we definitely like.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm a huge fan of the magic system.
I'm glad to hear that.
There's a lot there, and it adds to the game, so yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely looking forward to seeing what Terranoth brings.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's going to be an interesting sort of perspective, what magic's going to be in a more focused state, which is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, without going into too many details, since a lot of that work was done by Tim Cox and Tim Huckleberry, but it definitely, Realms of Terranoth definitely takes magic and much more fully realizes it as something your characters can do.
You're getting us all excited over here.
Well, good. I'd like people to be excited.
Yes, we're definitely excited about Realms of Terranoth. It just looks amazing what they've announced so far. So yeah, hopefully we'll be seeing that very, very soon.
Yeah, but yeah, going back to your question, I don't I think overall, yes, there were a ton of lessons that we learned from Star Wars and other working with the narrative dice system previously, and in general, a lot of the changes we made were because of it becoming a generic system. There were little things we wanted to tweak, like how defense worked. I mean, some of them got brought back into Star Wars afterwards, and like some things where we were just like, yeah, those rules need to be improved. Certain talents will not make an appearance again because we feel like we can do a better job or do something better with them going forward. But yeah, a lot of it was definitely because a generic system just has different requirements.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and I guess that the 4 defense die limit, which was something which basically came from Genesys, and that's now been ported across to Edge and Age and Force and Destiny as well.
Yep, that is correct. That was basically the 4 dice limit for defense dice was what we felt is just a much more elegant approach to dealing with defense, because we know that there's been a lot of confusion, and reasonably there has been a lot of confusion on what adds to defense, what gives you defense, and hopefully this plus clarifying what gives you defense and what adds to defense will basically will make this process a lot less painful for people.
And it kind of marries up as well with the Starship Rules as well, which have always been that 4 defense die limit. So it sort of gives it that blanket rule, which is good.
Well, also the Starship Rules in general. I know in any future Star Wars games I run, it's going to be using the Genesis vehicle rules, because the few niggly things about the Starship Rules or vehicle rules in the Star Wars roleplay has also been ironed out and put in Genesis, which I think is great. It just makes it, the ambiguities are sort of not so ambiguous by just not being there anymore, which is good.
Oh, well, thank you. Max Brook actually gets a lot. Should get a lot of credit for that one. That was a little passion project he took on while he was spending his most of his time in his role as X-wing designer.
Nice.
He got that was after he got promoted over there from the RPG department.
Right.
Well, sideways promoted.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should look at the next question, which comes from Darth GM on the FFG forums,
which would be Phil.
We're just going to stick with Phil.
No.
Well,
what, you don't want to try?
You've heard the outtakes at the end of the episodes, right? I'm not going to, particularly from me.
So he asks, what's your preference, generally, using or creating a complete homebrew setting or adapting and playing in an existing IP universe? I'm pretty interested to hear the answer to this myself.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I have honestly done both. It certainly depends on what existing IP we're talking about. And I have some favorites that are done by other companies, and honestly, I've been privileged to work on 2 of my favorite IPs, Star Wars and Warhammer 40,000.
Yeah.
And so I do enjoy playing in an existing universe, whether it's with using this mechanical system or a role-playing game that's been designed for it or whatever. I mean, honestly, one of my long-term loves has always been the original D20 Iron Kingdoms setting done by Privateer Press. Yeah, a sort of steampunk. They call it Full Metal Fantasy. It's like proto-steampunk. And it always has had a soft spot in my heart. I've still got all of those first edition books.
Nice.
But yeah, at the same time, design your own setting. It gives you a lot of freedom and a lot of options to do stuff you couldn't do normally. Like I mentioned before, that my current game that I'm running is in a homebrew setting, and honestly, one thing I was thinking about is that I think in a lot of ways every person's game sort of becomes a homebrew setting to some degree, no matter where it's set. I know that most of my games, especially as the game goes on, I start to take more and more liberties with the lore to tweak it as I see fit. So I think there's...
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, because that actually fits in really nicely with the next question when we're talking about creating your own settings and doing what you like. Because Ricky Buxton and Stacey Gamergirl have asked, have you looked at the community content being created? And if so, are there any standouts for you? And is there anything specific that you're secretly hoping to see the fans of Genesys create for the system? Which I just thought was perfect with what you just said.
Yeah, and to answer the question, I certainly have been checking out what the fans have been creating. I mean, that was one of the whole ideas behind this, was to make something that people could take and run with. So absolutely, I wanted to see what people would do. And honestly, I've been really excited by some of the things that everyone has been creating. I think there's some stellar work out there. Unfortunately, since I am representing the company in this interview, I can't, or I don't think it's fair really to call out anyone's specific work and say, that person, that's really good.
Fair enough.
Well, you say that now, but we're going to be releasing our own setting very soon. So I'm sure you're going to have a bit of a different opinion when that one comes out.
I'm sure it'll be stellar.
Oh.
No, I'm sure whatever you guys come up with will be awesome.
Thank you.
Oh, for sure. I mean, but yeah. To your second point, what I want to see the fans create. I would love to see more people work with more steampunk stuff in Genesys.
Right.
The Sovereigns of Steam setting that we put in for the steampunk setting in Genesys. Katrina Ostrander and I, we sort of brainstormed and fleshed that one out a bit because it was based off of the Planet Steam board game, which is pretty light on the backstory if you get into it. So we had to bulk it out a bit, and it got me really interested in the both the mechanics of designing some steampunk stuff. I mean, that would be a great place for skills like Operate, where you're actually piloting airships around and so forth. But it would also the attitude of steampunk is something that at the moment really appeals to me, because there's sort of that pioneering optimism in the with just enough mad science and chewing gum and can-do attitude, we can build our way out of anything, sort of thing.
Love it. So, as far as Arata for the book, now I know that it's very, very early days now, but when can we sort of expect to see sort of a bit of an Arata for what's been released so far?
For sure. And so I can't give specifics on when an Arata will come out, because that is a future release, but I can say it is certainly on my radar. The book has turned out to be popular enough that we've already been doing reprints and updating reprints with what the errata will be. So we definitely want to get an errata out soon so that people who bought the original will know what the differences are. I assure you, no major differences. Yeah. But we know that there were a few mistakes. I apologize for that. But we will definitely. We know we need to release an errata to just clarify those issues.
Yeah.
So,
and just
hopefully soon.
And just on that, Sam, as well, with the reprints that you've been doing, does that mean that the PDF that's available on RPG Now will also be updated at the same time?
It probably should be. Okay. No. Yes, that is something that we will. We'll make sure it happens as well.
Yep.
Once those actually start coming out into stores.
Cool.
And just making a note of that myself.
All right, because it's a great way to keep your errata up to speed.
Oh, for sure. And the only reason it's easy to forget about is because PDFs and our work with Drive Through is handled with an entirely different department.
Right. Fair enough.
It's true that. All right. So our next question, Sam, it comes from us, so it's got to be good. What was the inspiration for the choice of artwork in the book? The art seems to represent an incomplete picture, which adds to the flavour of the book, indicating the rules are incomplete and all that is needed is a person to complete the picture. Is that a good interpretation of where you were going with that design?
Yes, I think that's a spot-on interpretation, really. And credit for that goes to our studio head, Andrew Navarro, and Melissa Shetler, our head of our art department. The two of them got together when we were deciding what we were going to do for art for this book, and decided that what they wanted was, as you said, that sort of somewhat incomplete art, sort of sketchy.
Blueprint sort of feel.
Yeah, blueprints, actually. I believe Andrew described them as architectural drawings.
That's a better way of saying it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And because he wanted to really convey that idea that this, like you said, it was this was a blueprint and a basis for your own games. Yeah. And because we were dealing with so many settings and ideas, he didn't want it to just be a kaleidoscope of nothing but art from all of our different settings and all our different games. Obviously, we did a little bit of that in the middle, but there we could actually relate each one to the setting that it was appropriate for.
Yeah, it came out really well. Like, I think it could have been a bit of a gamble almost in how that was portrayed, but I think how it's done, just you hit the nail on the head. And first glance at that book, you realise that's what the art's trying to convey, is almost this sense of you're the architect, you're the person who is going to finish this world and setting and colour in the dots, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, for sure. And also Marcin Basta, the artist, he did amazing work on it too. Turned out even better than I was hoping.
So, going hand in hand with that, then, what is your favorite piece of artwork from the book?
Well, so I could say me. A picture of me in the space opera setting.
That's cheating.
But no, I wouldn't. I think my two favorite pieces, because I can never just pick one, are the GM table in the introduction on page 5, and the steampunk archaeologist on page 21.
Yes.
The archaeologist, she has that. She manages to convey like this whole idea of, like, again, discovery and excitement and all that in a very sketchy piece, which I thought was really cool. And there's a lot of little interesting details on like the weapon and her outfit and all that sort of thing. Again, really like interesting for something that's very much a line drawing.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, the GM table, there's something kind of cute, nostalgic about it that I like. I especially like that he created a GM screen using a different piece of art from the same book. I appreciated that touch.
Very good. So, as far as now, this is more of a question for us, Sam, rather than yourselves. But I think because you've done it, I think that it's probably fair for us to do it as well. That as far as our favourite books, our favourite artwork within the book, Mike, what's your favourite bit?
Mine is, again, super cheat answer, but mine's the front cover. As soon as I saw that front cover of the book, I was sold. Because people say don't judge a book by the cover, but I always judge a book by its cover.
You're a bit judgy like that.
I am. That's fine. But the artwork on that cover is spectacular. It starts off with your when you think of an RPG like D&D or whatever, you have your castle, your rolling fields, very, generic, safe fantasy RPG. But the more the picture unfolds, the more rich and crazy in design it becomes, really displaying to you as the viewer of this book that there's no limitation to the possibilities of what you do with this book. And whoever designed that art and did that art, A+ for effort and how they've done it. Just fantastic. I love it.
Martin.
Mr. Anders Finder, by the way. Give him a shout out.
Yep. All the shout outs. He was really good.
Personally, for me, all of it. Can I just pick all of it?
Now that's the cheat answer.
That's the cheat answer. Specifically, I love the archetypes and things like that, the pictures for each of those. But my favorite has got to be on page 21, which is of this sort of like an archaeologist. Yep. She's got like some sort of steampunk weapon on her back, and it just, to me, it speaks about the sense of discovery and all of those sorts of things that you have when you play this type of game.
Yep.
And the possibilities. So, yeah.
It's a great piece. Caitlin.
My favorite is actually in the space opera one, and sorry, it's not yours specifically, Sam, but that whole section, I just absolutely love. But the piece of art that's taken my heart in this book is on page 179, and that's this amazing looking female warrior who's got a mechanical arm and just looks like the most badass person I could possibly imagine running into on a spaceship, and I want to play her.
Good choice. She's actually from the Twilight 3rd edition cover, Twilight Imperium 3rd edition cover.
Nice.
This is why I like it.
Some pedigree behind it.
Oh yeah.
And for me, page 120, because it's very reminiscent of Star Wars with the Imperial Senate. I love that sort of expansive piece with the leader of whatever world or government that is within this setting. That does it for me. I think that it's just because I'm such a fanboy about Star Wars. But anyway.
You found the one piece of art that's closely linked to Star Wars, and that's where you love it.
I held on to it with dear life, yes.
Oh, that's totally fair. That was a hard one to figure out because we wanted to do one that represented social encounters, and
yeah. And that's
it's easier to draw people shooting each other than talking.
Because that's probably one of my favourite sections out of the whole book, but we'll get into that later on, is the social encounter side of things.
Okay, so next question we have is from Alex Sears. And actually there was a few people that was asking this question, particularly in regards to the dice. And they were interested in, like, as we know, you have to look at changing the symbols because the symbols from the Star Wars RPG was specifically created for Star Wars. But what we were interested in, what was the inspiration for the new symbols for the Genesys narrative dice?
Yeah, for sure. Well, so as you pointed out, like Star Wars role-playing dice symbols were designed specifically for Star Wars. So, yeah, when we did Genesys, we knew we were going to have to do something different. If you look at some of the Star Wars dice, you see some of the symbols are very closely related to the Star Wars IP. The triumph symbol being the most obvious one.
Yeah.
But the despair symbol and the failure symbols both have their links as well. So does the threat, and even the advantage symbol. Honestly, it's only the explosion that's really generic. So we knew that when we were doing Genesys, we were going to have to do something different. And since we were going to do something different anyway, we decided let's try and put more thought into how we would do symbols that would be more generic and have a little more impact with the symbols themselves. So the graphic designer who did all of the work on Genesys, Sean Boyk, he put a lot of thought into this. He wanted positive and negative symbols to all have some interlinking elements that made visual recognition a little easier, sort of similar to how we, on the dice, all of our positive dice have slightly lighter colors in black ink, while all of our negative dice have slightly darker colors and white ink. Again, another one of those like small little visual cues that helps quickly recognize stuff on the table. So when Sean went in there, let's see, the chevrons, for example, on the advantage symbol are supposed to sort of mirror the sunburst arms on the triumph symbol, with the where the spikes are sort of inverted triangles that are completed by the circle, and then the success symbol, of course, is right in the middle of the triumph as well.
Yep.
And then the X is a sort of a universal failure symbol, right? Like, oh, X. You're too bad, buddy.
No other interpretation for that one.
Yep. So, but then the threat ring, the ring of spikes, the whatever you want to call it, has some of the same X elements as well. It's got the same points to it.
Yep.
But it's still visually different. And then despair is basically a ring around the X, which links both those symbols up. And then, but at the same time, triumph and despair are both the most complicated symbols, and they both have circular elements linking them together as well, because Triumph and Despair, the two symbols that don't cancel each other out, and the ones you want to recognize when they show up. So yeah, I could keep going for a while.
The one thing that I found interesting was that the advantage symbol looks like an A. It's really easy to teach other people that. I know that sounds weird,
yeah.
but yeah.
No. I'm gonna totally say we meant to do this. Sean might have actually.
Yeah.
The hardest thing about using these dice for someone like us who's played Star Wars forever was trying to read the dice was like rewiring your brain. It's just like,
yeah, because I had dots cancel out dots, explosion cancel out, like all that, and I'm like, I have to relearn.
Well, my current play group played Star Wars before we did Genesis, and half of them still have their Star Wars dice, which they still use. Which I mean, obviously works just fine, but there have been points where I'm just like, guys, I need you.
Come on. You're going to be at my table. You got to go,
It's when they start throwing the different colours together of the different dice, and you just go, and Martin does it.
Triggered.
I need more Genesis dice, okay?
Yes, this is true.
Very good. All right.
Something else we're working on.
So I'm going to ask a really crunchy rules question. All right. So how many Destiny points can be spent on at any one time in a round? Now, in the rules, page 28, it states another limiter on story points is that you can only spend one story point during a single action unless an ability specifies otherwise. If your character has multiple ways to spend story points during an action, you'll have to think carefully about which of those ways provides the best opportunity to spend that story point. Likewise, your GM may only spend one story point per action. Should this mean action with a little a or action with a big A? Meaning it can only be used once per turn by a single player.
It should be action with a little with a little a. I guess you would say. We probably could have said check. Honestly, actually, sorry. Let me rephrase that. Yeah, we could have said check because or action because checks generally are actions. But we did basically meant one story point per check per player. There probably are a couple cases where you can make two checks in a turn and you could spend a story point on, or you could spend a story point on each of them and your GM could spend a story point on each of them. But basically all we wanted to avoid was multiple, and what the rule is supposed to disallow is spending multiple story points on a single check.
Right.
So basically all we wanted was so that you either are choosing to upgrade the difficulty when you're targeted, you're choosing to upgrade the ability when you are making the check, or you are choosing to trigger something after that check is resolved.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah. So that is how it should work. Sorry, I got a little circular there.
That's okay.
No, that answers the question pretty clearly for us.
Cool.
Yeah. All right, the next question comes via Facebook by Ricky Buxton. Now, he asks, in creating archetypes, a point value system is provided using XP. However, the XP of some are high compared to these guidelines. Can you explain this discrepancy?
Yeah, for sure. So our guidelines for creating archetypes are definitely supposed to be guidelines. We did not expect them to be complete rules for that you had to adhere to very strictly, or the game would shatter. No, but basically one thing we've learned as we've made archetypes or species or whatever as we've been going forward is the more you reduce the starting XP of an archetype, the more it becomes intrinsically a lot less appealing. So, and this has been borne out in playtesting as well. We could make archetypes with a lot of great abilities, that you are definitely paying the proper XP for to get. But the more we reduce their starting XP after a certain point, usually in the 70 to 80 range, once we start getting around there, players, no matter how good their other abilities were, players looked at those archetypes and said, I don't know, I don't want to do this. It's that lack of customization makes them a lot less appealing. We also have to factor in a lot of other things we've learned about characters over the years and how they interact with the settings. So, and a lot of that depends on the setting that you're using. So, for example, if you're playing in a modern or a sci-fi game, and it's going to have a lot of combat in it, your agility is going to definitely be more valuable because your combat's related to it, your piloting's related to it. That's going to be a go-to characteristic. And so you create an archetype with high agility that's going, even all other things being equal, an archetype with high agility will probably be valued as slightly better than an archetype with high cunning, for example.
Yep.
A fantasy setting, maybe Brawn's going to be that way. But maybe the GM's going to run a game that's mostly social, in which case it's probably going to be presence. I mean, you get the idea. Same thing with skills, and same thing with archetypical abilities.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's basically half science, half art, or maybe better to say half science, half instinct. And so hopefully the science elements come through in the guidelines that we provided, but there hits that point where you have to through some testing, some feedback from your friends or your players. You might have to tweak things after the fact, and that's what has definitely happened with most of these archetypes. So, and you should feel free to you don't need my permission, but you should feel free to do that in your own games as well.
As I've said a number of times in the show, it's not as though the campaign police are going to turn up and knock on your door. So
No, but that is some valuable advice you've given there about the limiting player options in the amount of XP that you give, and something that we probably should go over on our own setting.
I'm sure you could do a show about that.
All right, so Martin, our next question.
Well, the next question sort of ties in with that a little bit, being that, and this has been asked by Savage Bob. So the Genesys core rulebook doesn't include any advice on creating custom careers. Any reason why this was left out? And what advice can you give us on creating a career and keeping it balanced?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the big reasons we didn't put rules for creating custom careers is because we feel it's actually pretty easy to make a career, and it's pretty hard to break a career. They are basically just a collection of 8 skills that you feel that career needs to function, or are in core to that career. And as long as you don't give it more than 8 skills, it should probably be fine, or less than 8 skills. And since careers don't force you into buying specific skills, they just make it cheaper. It's hard to create a career that's going to be unbalanced with other careers. It more depends, again, on what kind of game you're running. If you are running a game that is going to be combat focused, a career that has a bunch of combat skills, of which we made some, like the soldier has way more combat skills than the tradesperson, for example. If the game is all about fighting, then that soldier is the person playing the soldier is probably going to feel like they got a better end of the deal. But that's more of a problem you're going to run into in any game that has a skill-based system. And it's more about giving your players a good idea up front of what they can expect. In this mech game that I'm running, I told everyone that they were going to be fighting a lot of mechs. And some of the players wanted to do regular dudes outside of mechs. And I've certainly worked to accommodate them, but sometimes they take a stray cannon around, and I can't be held responsible for that.
Perks of a session 0, you make sure you set it out up front.
Exactly.
So our next question comes from us. Oh, sorry. Our next question comes from us. What was the reasoning behind limiting brawn and willpower from affecting derived attributes after character creation?
Yeah, for sure. That is something we've stuck with ever since the narrative dice system was first designed, and our reasoning for doing that has been that the first part of it was to make sure that no characteristic upgrade was too much better than any other after the game began, and the other was for simplicity. So the simplicity element is if you want to improve your wound threshold and your strength threshold, you have to go to talents to do so. The one odd thing about it is soak, and it's one of those. Honestly, that's one of those oddities of design. We could have potentially done it a different way, but at the time we went with that, and it worked. And now I feel like people are pretty used to it, so we've decided it was better not to change that particular one.
Yeah.
Also, with the exception of fantasy settings, brawn is probably the interesting way, one of the weaker characteristics if you don't link one of something to it. So linking soak to brawn does make brawn a more appealing thing to increase in every setting, but a fantasy setting where you're going to be doing a lot of melee combat.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the reason behind it when we first did it, way back when we were first messing around with the narrative dice system. And since most of our settings we talk about aren't fantasy, I would say that's still a good reason to keep soak linked up on that.
Yeah.
Sorry, again, I could probably go on for hours about that. Apparently.
Oh, good. All right, so now getting on to talents. So what are the requirements for talents with the improved and supreme descriptors? Do you need to have the base talent before you can get the improved talent? Is that the same for the supreme version as well?
Yeah, for sure. And yes, you do need the base version of the talent for the improved version and the base version of the talent for the supreme version. And I believe we call that out in the talent description itself. In fact, the italic text at the top of the talent rules itself. So if you look at Scathing Tirade Supreme, it says your character must have purchased the Scathing Tirade talent to benefit from this talent. But so you don't need the improved version to purchase the Supreme version, but you definitely need the base version. But part of the reason we did that is actually that text is not as it's basically a rule, but it's almost more reminder text, because if you read the description of those talents, they frankly just don't work without the without the base version.
Yep.
Yeah. And we designed them that way deliberately. So we put in the reminder text mostly just to make sure somebody didn't make a bad purchase that they regretted later. But yes, that is the intention. So like all of the improved and supreme versions say, when you are doing that thing you can do because you have that talent, or doing the action allowed by that talent, or some variation of that. So if you don't have that talent, you can't perform that action, and you can't use the improved version of that.
Cool. That answers that question.
The next question, still in the realm of talents, is the sidestep talent an action or a maneuver? In the book, it is an action, but in Star Wars, it is a maneuver.
Yes. And that is a mistake on our part. It should be a maneuver. Sidestep would not be good enough if it was an action. It would plus it unbalances it with its melee version. I should know this.
So should we, apparently.
Yeah, it's sidestep, but for melee.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but in any case, yes, that is a mistake. and it'll be corrected in the errata.
All good.
Well, we got a little bit interested about what the reasoning was behind limiting dedication to only affect a single attribute once, which is a bit of a change from the previous rules.
Yeah, for sure. So that was based on playtester feedback when we first tested Genesys, and was because of the talent pyramid. So it wasn't a problem we had run into back when we used specialization trees, but once we introduced the pyramid, we hit this very interesting point where buying up to rank, and we actually tried a few different configurations, but settled on the pyramid eventually. And when you buy up to rank to tier 5 the first time, it takes a lot of experience. I believe it's 175. It should be 175.
The math checks out.
But
we know this because we actually did the math over a period in one of our episodes to try and fully figure it out, and it was quite an ordeal with the two guys doing the math.
It was a real roller coaster.
It was.
We got it wrong many times.
Martin got it wrong many times.
There's some like formula that figures it out. It's a geometric progression, but in any case, yeah. So 175 XP first time, but then it's only 75 XP the second time because you're basically putting a new quote unquote layer on the outside of the pyramid.
Yeah.
And so what the feedback our playtesters came back to us with was, especially the second times, just diving hard for dedication was just too good an option to consider anything else. And so we knew that when you have a specialization tree, you're kind of limited for mining for dedication, although it still happens. The fact that there's a phrase mining for dedication indicates that that's a thing. But you're somewhat limited by doing it because you have to buy another specialization that costs experience as well. Sometimes it's a straight shot, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the straight shot to dedication would give you worse talents than if you meandered a little bit. All of those things went into making the process of just getting dedication over and over and over again really onerous, and here we didn't have it. So we considered a few different options for how to deal with it. We even talked about making dedication ranked at some point, but trying to explain how you would create the mythical rank 6 was too complicated. We decided to give up on that one, and we decided that what we would just do is make it what it is. Make it only affects each attribute once. It would help encourage people to branch out a little bit, and also it would encourage people to take other rank 5 talents, because once you've increased that one stat that your character uses all the time, whatever that happens to be, you might feel like, I could also increase that other stat that I use sometimes, but maybe I'll try this really nifty tier 5 talent that lets me knock somebody out and drain all their strain like a social vampire.
And there are some pretty cool talents out there.
There are, absolutely.
Well, and I really dig this limitation to dedication, because what it does at character creation, you really have to sit down and go, all right, my character's only ever going to improve its primary stat once. So you really need to figure out at the start when you're creating a character, am I going to invest all my XP into bumping this stat up nice and high? Because I'm only going to get one chance to increase it later on.
Yeah.
So it makes dedication even more of a special buy in this instance in Genesys. So it's a cool little tweak to the rules, but it really helps bring a lot of balance to the game, I think.
Good. I'm glad.
All right, so our next question comes from a fan of ours, Lee Wilton, who asked, how do you try to approach balance in a classless system, since min-max players have access to every talent rather than being limited to trees like in Star Wars RPG?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for one thing, we tried to pare down the number of talents to make sure that most talents felt worthwhile to take. We went through, removed ones that we, or didn't include ones that we felt people may feel were a little extraneous or anything like that. So we also condensed some talents. So instead of having a lot of different talents that removed setback dice. We just went with Knack for it, which was... All those talents were really useful when you had specialization trees because they helped define the tree. So they said you're really good at making these kinds of checks. So, but now that we have this system without specializations, Knack for it serves just as well because you can define it for yourself. So that's one. Yeah, that's one step we took. And then second, we made all of our rank talents scale. What we definitely knew people would do if they had the option, because we would do it if we had the option, was just if you could buy 5 or 6 or 10 ranks of Toughened as a tier 1 talent and just fill out the entire bottom of the talent pyramid, you would absolutely do that. And nobody would blame you for it. So to avoid that, we talked about the best way to do it was to make ranked talents increase in tier every time you bought them. So the first time you buy rank 1 talent that's ranked, it's bought at tier 1. The second time you buy it at tier 2, it costs more, it occupies a tier 2 slot, etc., etc. Yeah. That makes it really hard to spam one good talent that's ranked. And then third, the talent pyramid requires you to take a certain number of talents. You have no way of getting around taking... if you want to get a tier 3 talent that you think is really good, you are going to need to take 3 tier 1 talents and 2 tier 2 talents. And that means you're going to have to... It doesn't necessarily stop you from choosing what you think is maybe the best talent, but it certainly gets you thinking about other talents as well. You don't just pick Step Aside because you are convinced that's the best talent you can take at tier 3 and call it, or tier 2 and call it a day. You have to think about what you're going to take at tier 1 to get there first of all, even if you're not interested in anything on tier 1. So I'm sure I'm sure that some of the talents are going to shake out in the community as better or worse. And we certainly try to avoid that, which is why we playtest. And
it always happens there.
Why? Yeah, of course. It always does. There's only so much you can do to balance things out. And nothing beats the community going and ripping something apart to really find all of the mistakes.
Yep. It happens with adventures as well. So when nothing ever survives the players.
Nope. but honestly, our biggest defense against that sort of better or worse judgment is making sure that all of our talents that are on the same tier do reasonably different things. So you don't have 2 versions of dodge that are almost exactly the same, but one costs 2 strain to activate and one gives a slightly different bonus. Because if we do that, then people are going to debate over which one's best, which one's worse, and all that. But as long as your choices are between dodge and scathing tirade, which do completely different things, you're not going to run into this the min-maxing or the best choice scenario as much, because it's going to depend a lot more on what kind of game you're running and what kind of character you're trying to build.
Yep.
Now.
All right, so as I mentioned before, the thing that excites me the most is social encounters. So the inclusion of social encounters in a rule set immediately after combat establishes that social encounters are just as important to the designers as combat is. Could you speak a little bit about the inclusion of those rules in the core rulebook?
Yeah, for sure. So social encounters were something that... and social sort of encounter rules in general, were something we always felt needed to be brought more to the forefront. And something that I wish we had highlighted more in previous iterations of the narrative dice system. And so Genesys was the perfect place to do that. And Katrina Ostrander was a real champion of this, and she took the lead on designing and writing that chapter. And actually her work also led to the creation of our new motivation system, which is also pretty intrinsically linked to the new social encounter rules. So when we were adding them as a codified rule set, we knew we didn't want it to be mechanically rigid as combat rules, for example, structured encounter rules, basically. We knew social encounters they're more fluid and flexible by default, and we knew people weren't going to get real on board with a system that was very much, I perform this shout maneuver, and then I can only take one maneuver, and then my aggressive rhetoric action punches them in the social stat for 10 damage.
Some fighting words.
Yeah, right. Like, if it's too much like combat, then, or it's just too structured in general, people are going to rebel against it because they're going to say that's not how social encounters go. You sit around, you talk, it's a back and forth. And they're absolutely right. So we wanted something that was familiar and similar to structured encounters, but it wasn't exactly the same as structured encounters. So first thing we did with the rule set was we focused on helping the GM define a social encounter, like where it starts, where it finishes, figure out what the goals are for the encounter. We also talked about how you could use rounds in the round system from structured encounters in a social encounter. It's not something you have to use, but it lets you put a little more structure into your encounter than, but not go full on actions, maneuvers, and so forth. And the idea there was basically it's something that players and GMs are probably already doing in most social encounters, which is basically taking turns. Making sure everyone gets a chance to do one thing, and then everyone gets a chance to do another thing. It also helps make sure that one player isn't going to dominate the entire encounter. And then one of the other really important points that we came up with, besides what are good ways to spend advantage and threat and triumph and despair, which since it's such a huge part of our system, coming up with ways to spend them that are unique to social encounters, that was a big thing that was going to help bring these encounters to life. Yeah. But then the final thing, but then the final thing was was clarifying how you could use strain and strain thresholds to sort of track who was winning in a social encounter. I don't want to speak for everyone, but personally, the only thing I can find frustrating in a social encounter is when there's a lot of back and forth talking, but at the very end, it feels like the GM has sort of arbitrarily decided, I guess your arguments convinced them, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if it comes across organically, that's great, but all too often it just you're left feeling like your character or your character skills didn't really do anything to make your argument succeed or persuade them or intimidate them or whatever it is you're trying to do in a social encounter.
Yeah.
So we talked about using strain thresholds as a way to track that, and how you can use skill checks to inflict strain. And even though you are inflicting strain, quote unquote, that's more of a tracking of, basically more of a tracking of how much you are being convincing or how much you are persuading them. And strain works for that because it's someone's mental stamina, it's their mental defense, and we're assuming that in a social encounter there is a goal that you are trying to accomplish, and there is a goal that your opponent is trying to accomplish, and so there is still that adversarial relationship. It just doesn't involve shooting somebody.
Very true.
It's pretty unique the way that you've used strain in that sort of regard. I think that, the thing that a lot of people get hung up about, though, is that if you use strain, that sort of the rules say that when you reach your strain threshold, you basically fall unconscious. But it's one thing that they obviously go into, you go into the rulebook, about that's not necessarily the way that it goes. It means that you're exhausted, or you've just you give up on your argument and bend to the will of the person who's making the check.
Right, and I guess we have my ramming a spaceship into a bigger spaceship tank for that. But yeah, so that's definitely a big part of it, is talking about like other ways that exceeding your strength threshold can be represented in a social encounter. And that also working at something we worked at after some playtester feedback and some testing of the system was the idea of compromise, which is something that your GM can use. You may not want to do it with your character, and you don't have to, but NPCs, if they hit half their strength threshold, they can be put into a situation where they compromise on something. Yeah, I won't do everything you want, but let's work something out. And that can also mean that it can be a lot easier to do, and it also means that social encounters, just like the real world, don't always end in complete and utter capitulation for one side or the other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mike?
Alrighty, so our next question is from Mitch Eric Bybighauser. Now, if I pronounce that name correct, I can only apologise, Mitch.
You need to introduce him to Phil.
Yeah, that's it.
Yep.
Don't worry, Mitch, I've got a terrible last name as well, so no one pronounces my last name correctly either, so yeah, we're bros there. Now, our question is from Mitch. Can you talk about creating encounter balance in structured social encounters? Generally, I've got a group of relatively persuasive PCs up against one stubborn NPC. How do I account for the 4 PCs on one NPC aspect? Should the NPCs strain target all the PCs?
Well, yeah, honestly, I think that is one approach you could take, and it's a good approach for sure. So this is a case where you may want to think of your social encounter as you would think of another structured encounter, a combat encounter, if you will. I know I just got through saying that like the two of them aren't the same, but if you think about it in a situation where it's an adversarial situation and one side is trying to win, we can sort of go from there. But so just like if you were making a combat encounter, if your PCs are set against a single dangerous NPC, quote unquote, then to make the encounter interesting, you're going to have to either make the NPC a real social powerhouse, basically, incredibly charming or threatening or charismatic or whatever, or you're going to have to give them a way to affect multiple players at once. Just the same as if it was a combat encounter, you would either make a single adversary super hard to kill, or you would make them super dangerous to everyone, so they had to be dealt with quickly.
Yeah.
So one way you could do it is, like you said, have their social skill checks affect all of the PCs. You'd take approach of just inflict the same amount of strain at all of the PCs when they make a social skill check, or another thing, you could give them an ability such as Scathing Tirade, which can affect multiple PCs at once. Another way of approaching it would be to make them really good at putting strain or convincing a single target, for example. So you could look at the local official, the NPC on page 134. They have an ability called Good at Needling. If they know one of your flaws, I think it's your flaw, they inflict more strain whenever they inflict strain on you. And so you could take the approach of that one NPC isn't going to take out everyone at once, but they could take out one player really quickly, and that's going to put pressure on the other players. And I'm using takeout as a euphemism here. That should make other players worried. But the final thing you can think about, a couple things you can think about, is that one, you don't have to always do a one versus many situation. Especially if it's a bigger and more grandiose social encounter, there's no reason why your adversaries can't show up in groups too. I mean, it's the reason why in diplomatic negotiations, both sides usually have like 4 or 5 people sitting at a table.
Yep.
So why not have your NPCs show up with some backup, like an advisor maybe, or a trusted confidant, and you have to convince them just as much as you have to convince the main person. And then the final thing you could always do, if you really want to mess with your players and they're willing to go along with it, is when you incapacitate somebody, again, this isn't them just saying, well, fine, I'm out. I didn't like this argument anyway. You could
boring conversation anyway.
That, hey, yeah, boring conversation. Exactly. But you could tell the player, hey, your character has, because their threshold has been exceeded, they have just been convinced that guy's right. Yeah. So what you think your friends are wrong now? How does that affect? Like, this could maybe become a multiple person versus multiple person social encounter if you're not careful.
Well, and convincing half of the players, might mean that they have to make a compromise.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
that's true.
Another idea you could do is potentially have your big bad, NPC act twice in social combat, sort of similar to a high-level Nemesis character. He has a chance to argue twice every round, essentially, and dish out double the amount of strain damage.
That's scary.
Oh, I like that.
It's like
Judge Judy.
Judge Judy.
I was just thinking that. Every single time someone tries to talk, no.
Yeah, and you're right. Why not? Because if those Nemesis rules we created for acting twice in a round are good enough for combat, why can't they be good enough for social encounters?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Martin.
Well, I have a question here from G. Lewis 2317 on the FFG forums.
Yeah, some sort of robot.
That name was already taken, so they had to add a couple of numbers at the end when he was born.
Yeah.
So he asks, when porting assets from Star Wars to a Genesys campaign, is there anything that I should keep in mind as far as the numbers are concerned?
Yeah, so we certainly made some change. We certainly made some changes. We've been talking about those. But generally, I would just suggest defaulting to Genesys's rules if there's any equivalent. Right. So you're porting talents. If there's already the talent over there, just use that talent instead. Ditto on skills, ditto on characteristics, etc. But in general, you probably won't have many problems if you want to use something from one of your Star Wars books in a different campaign. No.
Very cool. So the next question we have, and something that I'm personally very interested in, is from Ty Prunty, and he asks, I would like to make a PC that can change shape into an animal like a wolf or panther. How would a person best show that in a character sheet? Personally, I want to play in that campaign, Ty. If you want to let me know, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So sorry. So yeah. It's an interesting idea because you're almost asking for like more of a mechanical, like an actual physical solution. The first thing that pops to mind is 2 character sheets, but I kind of understand why you may not want to track 2 character sheets. It also depends on, are we talking like the transformation where you're keeping your mental faculties, or are you turning completely into an animal? If you're going like full wolf, then you probably do need a second set of full profiles, because you won't have any of your human characteristics going along. So, but if you're doing a more like druidic or shape changery or werewolfy type thing where you keep like your intelligence, maybe your skills, I don't know, maybe you could take a character sheet, cut out the section that has the characteristics and the derived attributes on it, and maybe use some staples to attach one side of your character sheet so it flips back and forth. Maybe something like that.
Somebody who's a budding graphics designer, there you go, that's your job.
Yeah, it really does depend on which attributes are changing when you change back and forth.
Yep.
For that, but it shouldn't be too hard.
Cool. All right. So this is a question that we had a lot of questions on. So we're going to kind of just, given the time frame, we're just going to condense them all into one question. So lots of questions about superheroes. What are your guidelines for suggestions, ideas, etc., about running a supers game?
Yeah. So as far as superheroes go, one of the things, first of all, and the reason we made superheroes a tone instead of a setting, I should mention, is because we figured that you could run a superhero game in any setting. I think comic books at this point have sent superheroes from everything back to the Renaissance all the way up to the far future. Yes. So no reason you can't do the same for first. So that's why we went with the idea of a tone, because it could be laid over any setting.
Yeah.
I would definitely suggest that, for example, representing superpowers like super strength, I would recommend sticking with the super attributes rule that we came up with. Mm-hmm. Some people might be tempted to increase your stats above 5, but something we've found over the years with the narrative dice system is that the higher you make the stats, the probabilities start to get a little wonky in the dice pool, and so your really high stats where you're rolling like 7 or 8 ability or proficiency dice, you start to have to deal with a whole ton of triumphs. Your success rate is off the charts. It gets kind of messy. So the idea is that super attributes are designed to work more within the limitations of the dice pool that keeps the dice pool a little more manageable. You still can have these like impressive strings of successes, but 1, it's a little less likely, but 2, it keeps the probability of failure a little more likely, which is better for a game in general if you have a chance of failure.
Yep.
But yeah, you're going to still get those impressive success strings on certain actions that are going to make your characters feel like superheroes. And I mean, yeah, that would be one guess. Realize there's a lot of different superpowers out there. I would definitely play around with magic if you want to have superheroes that are sort of magician-y. I know there's a few of those. There's a few magician superheroes out there, maybe just 1 or 2.
Just 1 or 2.
Yeah.
One thing also is you're doing like modern day superheroes and you want to do a like Iron Man-y type character or another like high tech character. Yeah. Why don't you look at some of the like armor or weapons or other gear from other futuristic settings and bring it back into the modern day? Because that super high level of tech should make yourself feel like a inventor superhero. What did it call? Tinkerer superhero?
Yeah, Tinkerer, yep. Kind of like your Iron Man type thing, who's got how many iterations of armor is he up to now?
He had an army at one point.
Batman's a perfect example of that.
What about if you want to shoot lasers from your eyes?
Shoot, you could do magic, or honestly, just make up a weapon profile that is stuck in your eyes. Heck, you know what? Use the lasers from the laser pistol from the sci-fi setting.
Yep.
Say it's in their eyes, so it can't be disarmed, and it's just an attack action that they can make from them.
An elegant solution.
Simple as that. Yeah.
There you go. Very good. Cool. But
Make sure you give everyone else something awesome too. Because
a couple of people also had questions about, would you have powers as talents or have them as skills or whatever else as well? What's your thoughts on that?
I think talents are probably a better way than skills for powers, depending on what the power is. If the power is something super generic, like maybe if you did the flight power, you might have the flight skill, but although then again, super flight seems to be something that's either on or off, so that's probably just as better as a talent.
Yeah.
Talent, you can fly. Done. Well, I mean, that is basically what our fly ability is. Yeah. It's like, see the sidebar in the structure and counter chapter, and it's basically what you can do. It does have some rules associated with it. So generally, I'd say talents, maybe a few skills. The other thing is like a lot of superheroes are born with certain abilities. So it may also be a case where instead of like leveling up your core super ability, you start the game with it and everybody invents their own, whether it's a special ability, sort of like what archetypes get, or something along those lines. And honestly, if you're going that route, you could make those archetype powers really dumb, like real good.
Well, there was a write-up
as long as everyone else has.
Yeah, exactly. There was a bit of a write-up that they mentioned in the latest announcement for Realms of Terranoth, which talked about these special abilities, which sort of, I think somebody mentioned, and I hadn't thought about that you could use those sorts of abilities in a superhero setting as your superpowers, and I thought that was a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, actually. Again, I wish we had thought about that before we had invented Totally our idea all along, guys.
All right. Now, our next series of questions. Well, we've sort of condensed it all down as well. Magic. We had a lot of magic questions.
Oh my God, did we have a lot of magic questions?
And, so I think a lot of the magic questions are going to be answered in, as we were saying before, in the Terranoth book. But we've got a couple here we'll go ahead and ask you anyway, Sam.
For sure.
The first one comes from the FFG forums from Endase. And his question is, what inspired such a radical take on magic? Was it in response to a specific source, like a series of books, video games, or similar? Or was it just a sense that the mechanics better supported a base magic skill with advantage to trigger effects approach? In other words, did you want to emulate something in particular, or did you just look for a way in which the mechanics could be engineered into the concept of magic?
Yeah, I'm going to say yes.
All right, next question.
No, in all fairness, it is a little bit about. I really have really enjoyed. There's a number of books that take movies that take the approach of magic as something that's less a defined subset of spells and more one using their will or their whatever to accomplish supernatural feats. And I thought that was something really interesting, and it's also something that hasn't been done with the narrative dice system yet, and also honestly, we haven't really done with any of our role-playing games that Fantasy Flight has made since I started here. So it seemed like a really cool thing to do something very different. Yeah. And then also, it's a good point though. It is the new magic system fits more into the core dice mechanics. You are making a skill check at the end of the day. And we thought that would be really cool to do as well, and it helps reinforce the core nature of the system. But and finally, it meant that we were able to present magic in a simpler package, really. Instead of providing this huge list of spells to go through, you just need to know some basic magic actions. And then once you understand the how of adapting them, you can be creative. You can come up with whatever you need on the fly and just adapt your magic to that. But you don't the basics are really easy to grasp.
Yeah, so on that, it once again ties into our next question, which was by Darth Dude, and it sort of asks, how do you adapt the magic system to non-damage spells like charming the target, creating illusions, hold or sleep, or even find, like location spells?
Yeah, for sure. And you could definitely go really deep into this, but I'll try and keep it sort of brief. So sometimes I think you can definitely adapt current spells to do what you want to do, and we tried to keep them relatively broad, so those that option was always there. So, for example, something like create an illusion, I would say that'd be fall under conjure, and because you're summoning up allies, and maybe it's a little easier to do, like the difficulty's one less because they're an illusion, or maybe you don't have to worry about making them quote unquote friendly because again, it's an illusion, it's not an actual creature. Curse actually has like ways to immobilize and paralyze a target. So if you're trying to do a like hold person spell or a sleep spell, Curse is probably a good spell to start out with that.
Yep.
Like if you're trying to find stuff, depending on how you want to do it, if you want to do it like Magic Radar, then maybe a utility spell but increase the difficulty. But if you're trying to do something that's more like increase my senses so that I can sniff out the traps or something, maybe just use Augment and boost your perception and sort of take that thematic approach. Yeah, but at the same time, I think it is totally fair to say that we have not exhausted all of the magic actions that could be out there. Right. As much as I'd like to say that we just got it completely done the first time, problem solved. No. I think there are probably other magic actions, quote unquote spells, if you will, that are not covered by our core system and that you could do other things with. And hopefully you can use the stuff we've created to create new spells, especially if that works for your setting.
Yeah.
And you can use what we've done as a guidepost.
Yeah. I think that at one stage, later on down the track, especially once Terranoth, the Realms of Terranoth comes out, is that we would probably do an entire show topic on magic, and we'd love to have you back maybe to talk about that.
Yeah, either me or you might want to talk to one of the guys who's really working on it, like Mr. Cox. Cool. Not that I'm saying I don't want to come back and talk to you, but, I just hate for other people not to get their chance to talk about some of the things they got to work on. We will
certainly talk to you and the rest of the staff about that. Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so our next question comes from Darth GM, aka Phil. So the book gives us 6 tones that can be applied to a game. How did the idea for tones come about?
So tones were something that came about when we were discussing settings, because we knew we were going to do settings really early on, and we started discussing politely what settings we were going to do, and something like horror would come up, and one of us would be like, horror is not a setting. You can have horror anywhere. You can have horror in fantasy. You can have horror in sci-fi. I mean, look at Alien. So it was like, well, that's obviously not it. Or and we sort of started riffing on that, like, oh, what about romance? What about comedy? Like, and so when we were like, well, obviously these things are things you can do with a game, but they're not settings. Okay, so what are they? They're tones. They're, the literary definition of what they are is a tone. So, at that point we started talking about, okay, so how would we apply that to a game? Like it started out as sort of an intellectual question, like, what would we do with tones? Oh, and then some of them we already sort of knew what we wanted to do with them. Like horror, we wanted to come up with rules for fear and insanity, because some of those rules already existed, and some of those rules we wanted to bring in. And once we were doing it for one of them, we started thinking like, hey, maybe this could actually be a thing. Maybe we could elaborate on this and not just make this a one-off thing for dealing with a few oddball mechanics. And it's sort of ballooned from there.
Because I think that tones is just such a unique way of dealing with something that does cover multi-genre, I guess. So yeah, I thought that was an amazing way of portraying that in the book. So that was good.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it turned out.
No, it did. All right. Well, that kind of brings us towards the end of the question. But there's a couple of questions that we thought we might ask you towards the end, which you don't have to answer them if you don't want to. It's entirely up to you. But if you could have any license at all in, like, if FFG just had all the money in the world and could go and get any sort of license.
If they were Disney, in other words.
If they were Disney. So if you could have any license, what setting would you like to make personally for the Genesys Role Playing Game?
Oh, jeez. I don't know if I'd want to... Like, okay, there's certainly settings that I'd love for us to be able to work on, and and all that. But I think my dream setting might be something that we actually get to invent ourselves. Working on settings that are ours and not licensed settings it's been really rewarding with Realms of Terranoth, and I'd love to be able to start out from scratch and invent something new, and maybe that would be taking what we've done with Steam and building it up. Maybe it would be coming up with something completely new. I know I threatened some of my freelancers with one of these days doing a role-playing game that is all high seas, 18 tall ships, and it would sell hundreds of copies. But
I think I'd buy that.
Yeah.
Come on, let's face it, we'd buy anything with Genesys on it.
Yeah. This is pretty true.
Right.
If you want a guaranteed 4 sales, then
like I said, 100 of copies. There would be about 100 copies.
Because that was probably the thing that we found when we started doing the setting roulette. I don't know whether you've listened to that particular episode yet, but we just generated 4 random ideas and came up with a bit of a setting. And it sort of created this brand new setting that none of us really had a clue when we started the episode that's what we were going to create. And it certainly gives that unique feel. And I know that we've got other people that have also designed new settings that have never been seen before. So I think it gives a lot more buy-in for the players around the table if they're designing a setting which is an amalgamation of all of their ideas rather than an existing IP. I mean, everybody loves to play in Star Wars, don't get me wrong. But when it comes to, designing a setting that everybody's going to get that buy-in to create those exciting moments at the table, I think that having your own setting, as you say, is really exciting.
For sure. I would definitely agree.
Mm-hmm.
That level of investment just goes way up.
Yep, yeah. Exactly. And for our final question, and this is sort of tapping into your GM side of your brain, I guess. So what is the best tips that you've got for designing an enjoyable RPG campaign and keeping the players interested and engaged in seeing it through to the end?
So another question that you could do a whole show on, right?
And we may yet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But if I had to pick just a couple, I would say that one is try and figure out the one thing that motivates each of your players. It can be a backstory, or it can actually be like an action that your players like to do, and make sure you trigger that and you indulge in that. And honestly, it's more figure out for your players than figure out for your characters. Because I think one thing we can lose sight of is that our players have desires, and sometimes when we create characters, we're like, I'm going to create a character who's all about this thing that I wouldn't normally be into, but my character's into, or something like that. But it can, in the end, the player may still be desiring to do something or engage in certain situations. So definitely, I mean, it basically boils down to knowing your group and knowing what they like, but it's not something that should be ignored. And another thing, definitely, if you can come up with a reoccurring villain, definitely do that, but try not to, like, I had a reoccurring villain in one campaign that the thing was, every time he showed up, he just got his butt kicked by the players. And it really didn't make for a memorable villain the second or third time he showed up. Players weren't super worried about him. So if you are doing a reoccurring villain and you're not sure that you can keep them alive or keep them safe, I don't know, have them throw minions in, have them stand off in the back and cackle maniacally. But yeah, definitely work to keep those reoccurring villains scary seeming until at least halfway through the adventure, I would say. Yeah. Don't waste your villain on the first encounter.
No. Because one of the things that I've always tried to do is occasionally, and it's a little bit difficult to do to not give away too much about the plot or the story is to have those sort of cut to scenes. It requires a little bit of effort that you can read about. Something that West End Games used to do a lot of with their Star Wars D6 adventures is that they'd have these little cut scenes just to kind of drive the story along a little bit. But that's why I'm showing. Yeah, that's why I'm showing.
I like that.
Yeah. I guess it's one way of showing that that's what your bad guy is, but you don't have to actually have him appear anywhere on screen with the players, and that's normally good for the NPC.
If you start it, they will kill it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a bit like that.
That's right.
Cool.
I guess one other thing I've been trying real quick has been because my current game is set in a modern time. I've been giving players XP rewards for sending in-character emails outside of the game. Because we can only meet every 2 weeks.
Yep.
It hopefully keeps them engaged between sessions.
That's cool. That's a cool idea. I am so stealing that.
Still doesn't get them all to do it. But
Very good. Well, that kind of brings us to the end of the questions, Sam. There were a lot of questions there, and there were a few that we had to miss, unfortunately, but we'll try to get to that. As we said, there's entire topics thrown in amongst that as well that no doubt we will get either you or Tim or whoever decides to grace us with their presence, that we'd love to have them along. But yeah, thank you very much for taking your time out on your Friday night to spend with us Aussies on the other side of the planet.
Well, I really enjoyed this, guys, and it was awesome to sit down and chat with you. Really,
thanks very much. Yeah,
thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you.
And thank you for the listeners once again for your rules and games questions. Now, obviously, since we've answered a whole heap of questions tonight, we shall not be having our usual behind-the-screen segment, but this will return in a later episode.
So if you have a rule or a game question, a show topic for future episodes, or just want to have a chat with us, your hosts, you can track us down by searching at Dicepool Podcast on Facebook and Twitter. You can find us on YouTube by searching The Dicepool Podcast. And of course, you can send us an email at info@thedicepoolpodcast.com. You can also find us on the web at www.thedicepoolpodcast.com.
Our live play podcast and our main show can be found on your favourite podcatcher and, of course, iTunes. If not available, let us know that as well.
And don't forget to leave us a review either on iTunes, whatever podcatcher you use, and you can also leave us a review on Facebook.
Well, that's a wrap, and a big thanks to Sam Stewart for being our guest tonight on the podcast. I think that was a great treat for our listeners, and obviously a big treat for us. So thank you very much to Sam. And that's pretty much a wrap, guys. So I'm GM Hurley.
I'm GM Huz.
I'm GM Flano.
I'm GM Caitlin.
And together we are the Dicepool Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dicepool Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dicepool Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains the property of the Dicepool Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesys Role Playing Game, the Genesys logo, content and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.